That sound saved the free world. But the man who created it, he died nearly broke. In 1963, a journalist asked John Garand a question that would haunt American history. "Mr. Garand, you designed the weapon that won World War II. The government made billions from your invention. Why are you living in this small house struggling with medical bills?" His answer was simple: "I did it for my country." But here's what they didn't tell you. John Garand didn't just refuse money. He refused a fortune that, adjusted for inflation, would be worth over $100 million today. And he did it not once, but twice. This is the story of the greatest weapons designer you've never heard of. A man who changed warfare forever and asked for nothing in return. To understand why a man would give up $100 million, you need to understand where he came from. January 1st, 1888. A baby boy named John Garand was born in a small town called Saint-Rémy, Quebec. His father was a farmer, poor, devoutly Catholic, and desperately searching for a better life. The Garand family spoke French. They had no formal education, no connections, no wealth, just the dream that America promised something better. At age 11, John's family made the journey that millions made. They crossed the border into the United States. They settled in Connecticut, in the heart of America's Industrial Revolution. Young John went straight to work in a textile mill, 12-hour days, 6 days a week. Child labor wasn't just common, it was survival. The pay was barely enough to keep the family fed. But something happened in that mill that would change history. John became obsessed with the machines, not with operating them, with understanding them, how they moved, why they broke, how they could be improved. He began staying after his shift, studying the machinery, taking it apart in his mind, rebuilding it better. His supervisors noticed. This immigrant kid with broken English could fix machines that stumped. Experienced engineers. By 13, he was designing improvements to industrial equipment. He had no formal training, no engineering degree, just an innate understanding of mechanics that bordered on genius. By 22, he was working for multiple manufacturing companies, solving problems no one else could solve. He moved from textiles to tool and die work, from machinery repair to precision manufacturing. Each job taught him something new about metalworking, tolerances, and mechanical precision. But in 1917, everything changed. April 6, 1917. The United States entered World War I. And America had a problem. Our soldiers were going to Europe with the Springfield 1903, a bolt-action rifle that required 5 separate movements to fire a single shot. Think about it. In combat, to fire the Springfield, a soldier had to pull the bolt handle up, pull it back to eject the spent casing, push it forward to chamber a new round, push the bolt handle down to lock, then, finally, pull the trigger. Again. German machine gunners could fire 600 rounds per minute. American infantrymen? Maybe 15. The disparity was deadly. Boys were dying because they couldn't shoot fast enough. John Garand read the casualty reports in the newspapers. He walked past recruitment posters every day. At 29 years old, he was too old for the draft, but young enough to feel the guilt. He watched younger men march off to war while he stayed home, safe in his workshop. It ate at him. He made a decision. If he couldn't fight, he would invent. He began working on a machine gun design in his basement, not because the army asked him to, not because he was paid, because American boys were dying with inferior weapons. He worked through the night, every night, after his regular job. He spent his own money on materials, steel, springs, precision tools. His wife worried about the finances, but John was driven by something stronger than money. In 1918, the Bureau of Standards heard about this immigrant machinist with a revolutionary light machine gun design. They invited him to demonstrate it. John traveled to Washington, D.C., carrying his prototype in a wooden crate. He had never been to the Capitol before. He set up his machine gun in front of military officials and engineers from prestigious universities. They expected it to fail. It worked flawlessly. The gun fired over 1,000 rounds without a single malfunction. Military observers were stunned. This self-taught machinist had created something that teams of engineers couldn't achieve. But before it could be produced, the war ended. November 11, 1918. The armistice was signed. The machine gun program was canceled. Most men would have given up. gone back to their regular jobs, accepted that their moment had passed. John Garand did the opposite. He quit everything and made a bet that would define his life. In 1919, the U.S. Army hired John Garand as a designer at the Springfield Armory in Massachusetts. The Springfield Armory was the premier weapons development facility in America, established by George Washington himself in 1777. Its workshops had produced the weapons that won the Revolutionary War, the Civil War, and the Spanish-American War. And now, this immigrant machinist with an 8th grade education was walking through its doors as an equal to men with engineering degrees from MIT and Yale. His salary, $30,500 a year, about $60,000 in today's money. Not poverty, but not wealth, especially for a man with a family to support. The Army gave him an impossible mission: design a semi-automatic rifle that could replace the bolt-action Springfield. It had to be reliable in mud, sand, ice, and jungle heat. Accurate at 500 yards, simple enough for an 18-year-old farm boy to field strip blindfolded, tough enough to be used as a club in hand-to-hand combat, and light enough to carry for 20 miles. The rifle also had to fire the standard .30-06 cartridge, one of the most powerful rifle rounds ever created. That cartridge generated enormous pressure, over 50,000 pounds per square inch. Managing that force in a self-loading mechanism was a problem that had stumped weapons designers for decades. Oh, and one more thing. It had to work perfectly with the first shot, because in combat, there are no second chances. Let me explain why this was nearly impossible. A bolt-action rifle is simple. Human muscle does all the work. But a semi-automatic rifle has to harness the explosive force of gunpowder to eject the spent casing, cock the hammer, load a new round, and reset, all in a fraction of a second. The energy had to be perfect. Too much, and the rifle would jam or break apart. Too little, and it wouldn't cycle. And here's the problem. Temperature affects gunpowder. The same cartridge that works perfectly at 70 degrees might fail at -20 or +120. Desert sand is different from jungle mud. Arctic ice creates different problems than tropical humidity. John Garand had to design a rifle that would work in all of those conditions, with all types of ammunition, in the hands of soldiers who might have only basic training. For 10 years, John Garand worked in near isolation. While other engineers went home at 5 p.m., he stayed until midnight. While they took weekends off, he was in the workshop, filing metal by hand. His workshop became his world. Blueprints covered every wall, failed prototypes filled shelves. He barely saw his family. His children grew up knowing their father only as the man who disappeared into the workshop every morning and came home exhausted every night. He built dozens of prototypes. They jammed, they misfired, they broke. The Army tested competing designs from other inventors, men with prestigious degrees and corporate backing. John Peterson, a famous designer with a decade of success, submitted a rifle. So did competitors from Winchester, Remington, and Colt. These companies had entire teams of engineers, unlimited budgets, and access to the best metallurgists in the world. John Garand had neither, just calloused hands and an immigrant's stubborn refusal to quit. He tested his prototypes in every condition he could simulate. He buried them in sand and ice. He soaked them in salt water. He fired them until the barrels glowed red hot. And every time, he found another failure, another weakness, another problem to solve. The pressure was immense. The Army was losing patience. Funding was being cut. There were whispers that the project would be canceled, that America would stick with the bolt-action Springfield forever. After a decade of failure, in 1929, Garand discovered something revolutionary. Instead of using the expanding gas from the barrel to cycle the action, which caused overheating and failures, he designed a gas trap system near the muzzle. Here's how it worked. A small amount of gas was captured just as the bullet left the barrel. That gas drove a piston, which drove a rotating bolt, which ejected the casing and loaded. The next round, all in 0.3 seconds. The rotating bolt was the key innovation. It locked with enormous strength when the rifle fired, containing the 50,000 psi of pressure, but it unlocked smoothly and quickly, allowing the mechanism to cycle. It was a solution that seemed obvious in hindsight, but had taken 10 years of failure to discover. It was perfect. In 1932, the U.S. Army conducted final trials. Garand's rifle competed against designs from Winchester, Colt, and other major manufacturers. The testing was brutal, more demanding than any previous weapons trial in American history. The Army fired 6,000 rounds through each rifle, in dust, in mud, in freezing temperatures. They dropped the rifles from 5 feet onto concrete. They dragged them through sand. They submerged them in water and fired them wet. They left them in freezing temperatures overnight and fired them the next morning. They heated them in ovens to simulate desert conditions. Only one rifle never jammed. Only one rifle hit targets at 600 yards after being dropped in sand. Only one rifle functioned flawlessly in every test. The military observers couldn't believe it. This self-taught immigrant machinist had beaten every major firearms manufacturer in America. On January 9, 1936, the U.S. Army officially adopted the M1 Garand as the standard service rifle, the first semi-automatic rifle ever issued to an entire army, not just in America, in the world. No other nation had ever equipped all of its infantrymen with a self-loading rifle. The British still use bolt actions, the Germans use bolt actions, the Russians use bolt actions. Only America would have every soldier armed with a weapon that could fire 8 shots as fast as you could pull the trigger. John Garand had done what no other weapons designer in history had achieved. He had revolutionized infantry combat, but the cost was about to become clear. Here's where the story takes a turn that will make you angry. In the United States, when a civilian invents something, they can patent it. That patent gives them royalties, a percentage of every sale. Thomas Edison became wealthy from his patents. Alexander Graham Bell became wealthy from his patents. The Wright brothers became wealthy from their patents. Between 1936 and 1945, the U.S. government manufactured over 4 million M1 Garand rifles at a standard royalty rate of just 5%. John Garand would have earned approximately $50 million. Adjusted for inflation, over $100 million today. But here's what happened. Because John Garand was a government employee when he invented the rifle, the Army claimed they owned the patent. The legal doctrine was called work for hire. Anything you invent while employed by the government belongs to the government. On paper, this made sense. The government had paid Garand's salary for 17 years. They had provided the workshop, the materials, the testing facilities. But the injustice was obvious. John Garand had invented something worth billions, and he would receive nothing beyond his modest salary. In 1940, some congressmen noticed this injustice. Representatives from Massachusetts, where the Springfield Armory was located, were particularly outraged. They introduced a bill to grant John Garand retroactive royalties for his invention. The bill proposed paying Garand $1 per rifle produced. Given the production numbers, this would have made him a multimillionaire. Not as much as he deserved, but something. The bill passed committee. It had bipartisan support. Veterans groups endorsed it. Newspapers editorialized in favor of it. It was headed for a vote. And then, John Garand himself asked them to stop it. Let me repeat that. John Garand personally requested that Congress not pay him royalties for his invention. He traveled to Washington, D.C. He met with the congressmen who were championing his cause, and he asked them, please, to withdraw the bill. In his own words, "I was hired to design weapons for the defense of my country. I have been paid a fair salary for my work. I need nothing more." The congressmen were shocked. They tried to reason with him. They explained that this wasn't charity, it was justice, that he had earned this money, that his family deserved financial security. John Garand was unmoved. His colleagues were stunned. His family was confused. His wife pleaded with him to reconsider. They had children to think about, college tuition to pay, medical bills, a mortgage. But John Garand was unmovable. Here's what you need to understand. Garand wasn't being naive. He wasn't being manipulated. He genuinely believed that profiting from a weapon of war, while soldiers died using it, was morally wrong. Every time he saw a photograph of American soldiers with his rifle, he saw the responsibility, not the opportunity. He couldn't look at a news report about combat casualties and think about royalty payments. It was incompatible with his sense of honor. But the story doesn't end there, because in 1945, something happened that would test his principles one more time. August 15th, 1945. World War II ended. General George Patton called the M1 Garand the greatest battle implement ever devised. It wasn't hyperbole. The M1 Garand had given American infantry a decisive advantage in every battle. At Normandy, American soldiers could fire 40 to 50 aimed shots per minute. German soldiers with Kar 98K bolt actions could fire maybe 15. In the Pacific, Marines could suppress Japanese positions while advancing, something impossible with a bolt-action rifle. Military historians credited it with giving American infantry a decisive advantage in every theater of war. The rifle had performed flawlessly in the Pacific jungles, in the frozen hills of Belgium, in the deserts of North Africa. It had been dropped from aircraft, dragged through swamps, buried in beach sand during amphibious landings, and it kept working. The after-action reports were unanimous. The M1 Garand was the most reliable infantry weapon ever fielded. And then, the numbers came in. The US government had spent approximately $1 billion producing M1 Garands during the war. But that was just government production. Private manufacturers like Winchester and International Harvester had also produced the rifle under license and made massive profits. Winchester manufactured over 500,000 M1 Garands during the war, at a profit of approximately $20 per rifle. Winchester executives became millionaires. Factory owners retired wealthy. The stockholders of these companies received enormous dividends. Meanwhile, John Garand still lived in a modest house in Springfield, Massachusetts. He still drove a 10-year-old car. He still clipped coupons to save money on groceries. In 1945, a coalition of veterans groups and sympathetic congressmen made one final attempt. They proposed a special bill, a one-time payment of $100,000 to John Garand for his service to the nation. That's about $1.7 million today. Not the full royalties he deserved, but something, a token of gratitude. The bill had overwhelming support. Veterans testified before Congress. Medal of Honor recipients spoke in favor of it. Newspaper editorials demanded it. The bill was going to pass. It was certain. Once again, he refused. But this time, he explained himself more fully. He wrote a letter to Congress that was read into the congressional record. He said, "If I accept this money, it sends a message that patriotism has a price, that serving your country is a transaction. I will not do that. The honor of knowing that my rifle saved American lives is payment enough. I need nothing more." The letter was met with silence in the chamber. Some congressmen had tears in their eyes. They passed a resolution honoring John Garand's service and integrity. But they respected his wishes. No payment was made. Instead of retiring wealthy, John Garand kept working. He continued designing weapons for the Army until 1953, when he was 65 years old. He developed improvements to the M1. He worked on experimental rifles. He mentored younger designers. He received a pension, a modest one, about $200 per month, barely enough to cover basic living expenses. He lived quietly, no interviews, no speeches, no book deals, no lecture circuit. When reporters asked to interview him, he declined. When veterans groups asked him to appear at events, he politely refused. He didn't want recognition. He didn't want fame. The man who armed the greatest military force in history asked for nothing. John Garand died on February 16, 1974, at the age of 86. His obituary appeared on page 12 of the local Springfield newspaper. 17 lines. No national coverage. The New York Times ran nothing. The Washington Post ran nothing. The man who had changed modern warfare died in obscurity. But here's the number that should haunt us. By 1974, over 8 million M1 Garand rifles had been produced. The design had been used in World War II, Korea, and early Vietnam. Even in 1974, 38 years after its adoption, the rifle was still in service with American allies around the world. It had become the most successful military rifle design in history. If John Garand had accepted even a 2% royalty, half the industry standard, he would have died with a personal fortune exceeding $150 million in today's money. Instead, he died with about $50,000 in savings. His house was worth maybe another $30,000. His total estate was less than what some of the factory executives who built his rifle earned in a single year. So here's the question we need to ask. Was he a fool? Or was he something we've forgotten how to be? Today, defense contractors are among the wealthiest corporations on Earth. Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, Northrop Grumman, their CEOs make hundreds of millions. Their shareholders profit from every conflict. A single fighter jet contract can generate billions in revenue. Executive bonuses are tied to weapons sales. Stock prices rise when wars begin. And we accept this as normal, as capitalism, as the way things work. We don't even question it anymore. But John Garand proved there was another way. He proved that service could be its own reward, that excellence didn't require extraction, that patriotism wasn't a marketing slogan, that a man could change the world and ask for nothing in return. In his final interview, at age 84, a journalist asked him if he ever regretted his decision. The journalist expected some hint of bitterness, some acknowledgement that maybe, just maybe, he had been too idealistic. His answer was simple. Every man must decide what he values most, his wealth or his integrity. I made my choice. I sleep well. And he meant it. Those who knew him in his final years said he never expressed regret, never complained about money, never spoke bitterly about the fortune he had refused. He lived simply, read extensively, and took quiet pride in letters from veterans who credited his rifle with saving their lives. Today, the M1 Garand is considered one of the most important firearms ever created. Museums display it. The Smithsonian has one in its collection. Collectors treasure it. Original wartime M1 Garands sell for thousands of dollars. Historians study it as the weapon that changed infantry tactics forever. Mechanical engineers analyze it as a masterpiece of reliable design. And that sound, that metallic ping of an empty clip ejecting, it became the sound of freedom, the sound that terrified enemies and reassured allies. Japanese soldiers learned to listen for that ping. It meant an American rifleman was reloading. It meant a brief opportunity to attack. But it also meant that for the previous 8 seconds, that American had fired 8 shots with devastating accuracy. German veterans recalled the sound with a mixture of fear and respect. They knew that the American infantry had a weapon advantage they couldn't match. John Garand never heard his rifle fire in combat. He never stood on a parade ground and received medals. He was offered the Medal for Merit, the highest civilian award, and declined it. He never gave a TED Talk or wrote a memoir. He never lectured at universities or consulted for defense contractors. He could have done all of those things. He could have become wealthy from speaking fees alone. But every veteran who came home because they had a better rifle than the enemy, they carried a piece of John Garand's integrity with them. Here's what I want you to remember. Excellence without ego, innovation without greed, service without recognition. In an age where everyone has a price, where everything is monetized, where personal branding is considered essential, John Garand proved that some men don't. He proved that it's possible to change the world and ask for nothing, that true greatness doesn't demand compensation, that integrity isn't negotiable, and maybe, just maybe, that's the most radical idea of all.